this after me is the reception. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll just make this real quick. And Chris is like, no, it's not starting until 5:30. Stand up there and do a few slides. So I'll do that. Not that you've ever seen me at the bar or anything like that. So anyway, the economy is doing well, right? We have had a heck of a run. I like to say, you know, we have gone, really, if you look back since deregulation, this has been the best run we've had, right, over the last 18 months or so. It really started second quarter of last year. Freight really got strong, improved by the fourth quarter of last year. Boy, it was just humming, right? With that said, a few of you, more than a few of you, have called me up recently and said, you know, is it getting a little soft? There's no reason to worry. Okay, we've had some things. There is no reason. This is the second longest expansion in our history, and there is no reason it can't be the longest. Okay. With that said, you know, we've had a few little things. We've had a couple more hurricanes, right? And so forth. That's wreaking a little havoc here recently. But things are going to pick up. I fully expect this to be a great holiday season, right? And things will continue to move forward. So I'm going to just step you through a lot of the stuff that I see coming. All right, so let's start. Real big picture here. Real or inflation-adjusted gross domestic product, that's the total value of all goods and services produced in the U.S. It's just a good measure of the economy. It's not really what I use to forecast truck freight volumes, but I think it gives us a good reflection. And again, it's very unique that we have an economy that is accelerating this deep into the economic cycle, right? And it's because of some things you've heard at this meeting, right? The regulatory environment has changed. We had tax cuts, right? And these all helped propel the economy. In the second quarter of this year, we had 4.2% growth, 3.5% growth in the third quarter. Two strongest back-to-back quarters we've seen in a few years, right? That's solid. In 2018, we're likely to see 2.9% growth overall, GDP growth overall for the year. That will be the highest level since 2015, right? So in tied really for the best year of this expansion, right? So it ties 2015 as the best. With that said, you can clearly see on the quarterly numbers, we're going to get a deceleration. You should expect that. Doesn't mean recession. It just means that things are going to slow down a little bit after some really strong growth, right? But still, fourth quarter, 2.7% growth. Around 2.5 to 2.6% growth next year. That's what I'm expecting for an annual increase. By 2020, that slows down to a little less than 2%. At this point, right? I hate saying the R word. At this point, that's where we're looking for 2020 and beyond, right? It's impossible to forecast at this point. But if we're concerned about that, it's not until then. So we've got another solid year. Hopefully by 2020, it's just, you know, a little bit less than 2% growth, but this thing continues. And again, next year we should hit the longest economic cycle we've seen in history. But as I said earlier, GDP is not what I use to forecast truck freight volumes. What we like to look at are what I call the buckets of freight, right? The first is the consumer. And in order to understand the consumer, you got to look at the labor market. The labor market is strong, right? On the left-hand side, these are monthly job changes. Over the previous 12 months, we've seen over 200,000 jobs created every single month. In September, the unemployment rate fell to the lowest level since December of 1969, right? And what that is really telling us, and we can look at some other data for this, is that the economy is at full employment, right? If we look at the number of unemployed people, there are more job openings today in the economy than there are unemployed people, right? Now I always get the question, well, why don't those people all have jobs? Well, the skills don't match up. We all know that in our businesses, right? You see that every day. But to me, this screams we're at full employment, and that's exactly what we are. By the way, this data goes back to the year 2000. We have never seen this, where the job openings exceed the number of unemployed people. So what does that tell us? We all know this, right? Job market's tight, right? We're at full employment, wages go up, and that's what you see here. Well, this year we'll see over 3% growth in salaries and wages for the first time in this economic cycle, right? This is one of the things we've been waiting for, and for the vast majority of people, what happens? Money that comes in the door goes right back out, right? So this translates into more spending. This year I'm expecting spending on goods, because that's what you're putting in your trailers, spending on goods to increase 3.8%, and still a solid 3.5% growth on goods spending next year, right? So not worried at this point about a recession or anything like that. By the way, holiday sales this year expected to increase 4.1%, right? So a lot more, I showed you the other day in the general session, a lot more spending online, right, and so forth, but really good, over 4% growth in holiday spending. So that's bucket number one. Consumers there, they're spending more because they got more in their pockets. Second bucket of freight is construction. Let me start with, construction on CapEx stuff, right? That has actually picked up. And so that's positive, right? Spending on factories and so forth. That's improved. But so has construction spending and construction and housing starts here. On the left-hand side, you have total housing starts. On the right-hand side, I split that out between single-family homes and multifamily homes. Let's start on the left-hand side. This year, we'll build nearly 1.3 million new homes. That is the most since 2007. Of course, when I say that, everybody panics. They're like, we remember what happened after that, right? We're not anywhere close to that. Remember, we were building over 2 million homes a year prior to the Great Recession. So we're not anywhere close. I will say, this is a positive, right? This is certainly not a negative. If you're in this space, the only thing that you can see on the right-hand side is single-family homes are certainly outpacing multifamily homes at this point. With that said, though, this is the one bucket of freight that we keep things going to accelerate a little bit more and doesn't, right? So we're building more. Last year we're going to build 1.3 million homes this year. That's up from, or nearly 1.3. That's up from a little over 1.2 last year. So it's certainly improving. I do think there's even more demand out there, but there's a couple things are going on. Mortgage rates are going up a little bit, right? And then also, in the areas where housing is sort of strongest and the demand is strongest, those areas often are having problems with finding enough space, enough land to build homes, and so forth, and that is also holding it back. With that said, very much in the positive camp, and construction is good if you're in that space. And then we've got the factory sector. The factory sector is accelerating, right? Good news, we got a new NAFTA, USMCA, very much a positive. Hopefully we get it passed through Congress, as you heard Bill and Chris talk earlier. And that's going to help the factory sector. And you can see on the left-hand side, the level of output is high. It's the highest of this cycle. But even the year-over-year gains are accelerating. We'll see a growth of 2.6% this year, up from 1.5% last year. And I think we can match that in 2019. And just recently, if you look on the right-hand side, we're exceeding 3%, closer to 4% growth on a year-over-year basis. So factory output is accelerating, and that's a positive. So there you go. You got your three buckets of freight. They're all good, and that's going to translate into better volumes, which I'll get to in a second. Lastly, though, in this area is, of course, the inventory cycle can play a big role in what you're seeing in terms of freight. If it's bloated inventories, that's going to slow down the number of shipments you're seeing. And as you can see here, inventory levels throughout the supply chain are no longer a drag on freight volumes. But you also see, and if you went to the general session the other day on infrastructure, I talked about this, that while coming down, it's still above, inventory levels are above their historic lows. And there's a reason for that, right? As we buy more and more stuff online, that means you have to have those products nearby, because our expectations are we're going to get it in 2 days or less, right? So we've seen an explosion of warehouses around the country and so forth, and so they don't hold on to the inventory very long. They cycle through it quickly, but they've got to have it on hand so they can get it to us, and that means it's also not coming, at least in terms of e-commerce stuff, it's not coming from across the country, right? So you can add this in. This is why volumes have improved, and they should remain strong. strong. Again, people are going to spend money this holiday season, and things look good, right? Before I get to trucking, though, let's look at one thing. I know we always get questions about diesel fuel prices and so forth, and you can see where we are. This year, they're expected to average $3.20 overall. We're currently at about $3.35. Next year, about the same, $3.21 expected. This is put out by the Energy Information Administration. The one thing, so we're going to remain about where we are. The one thing to look out for in the future is in 2020. In January of 2020, you're going to get the International Maritime Organization is going to cap sulfur levels for ocean carrying ships, right? And essentially, boils down close, is essentially going to put on highway diesel, right, in those ships now. That is going to likely to put upward pressure on prices of our diesel fuel. So just, expect to hear more. I know Glenn's here. We're following this. Glenn is working this issue and so forth. We're working with our counterparts at different associations. So I wanted to put that, and I know Glenn did through the committee and other things, let's put that on everybody's radar. That is something to look out for in 2020, right? We've seen a couple estimates of how much this could increase diesel fuel prices. I think it's just a guess, so I don't even want to give it to you, but suffice it to say it'll be up, right, as a result of this. So that's where we stand with diesel fuel prices. All right, so let's move on to trucking. So as you know, and because most of you participate in these surveys, every month we go out to for-hire motor carrier members and we ask them, both truckload and LTL, and we ask all of you a bunch of questions, right? We say, how many loads you have, how much revenue you collected, how many miles you ran, how much tonnage did you haul, how many trucks did you start the month with, how many did you, add through purchases, through leases, what did you get rid of, both in company tractors and ICs, and we take all that. By the way, it covers millions of loads, billions of dollars of revenue every single month. We take that data, we slice and dice it, and we can tell you what's going on. This is all types of truckload freight, so this is dry van, temperature control, flatbed, tank truck, right? And it's an index, right? So you want to look at the trend line, and you clearly see this run-up of freight, right? It's been very strong. You also see, though, just recently, a little bit of a downturn, right? Things did get a little soft at the end of the third quarter. I think that was for a couple reasons. One was, freight was really strong in June and July, right? So there was a pull forward of some international freight because of trying to get ahead of the tariffs, right? So it was sort of just displaced when it came, right? It came a little earlier this year as they were getting ahead of that, and nothing really too much more of that. Plus, you had hurricanes, sort of drag on freight recently, but that'll add to freight later, right? As the rebuilding process starts and so forth. So freight remains at a very high level. But the other thing to remember is we are getting into a period where you now have more difficult year-over-year comps, right? Because it was a year ago when freight got really good. So don't panic when you see those tougher year-over-year comps. We're fully expecting those. Give you a couple examples here. So year-to-date, number of loads, all types of loads again, year-to-date, year-over-year is up 4.2%. But in the third quarter, it was up 2%. So there's your slowing. It doesn't mean freight's slowing down. It just means that year-over-year comps are getting more difficult. For you LTLs, a similar situation. We've gone from a negative environment in 2016 to slightly positive in 2017. Year-to-date, up 4.3%. Actually, the third quarter for you folks was a little bit better at 4.7%. But again, expect a little bit of a deceleration in those volumes. By the way, it's not just ATA's data that shows this, right? This is pretty much going out in all different types of measurements. This happens to be U.S. Bank. It's quarterly indexes from their freight payment system. On the left-hand side, you have the number of shipments. You see similar trends, right? Number of shipments are at high levels, but did come down a little bit in the third quarter. Still year-to-date up 6.2%, even though the third quarter was slightly negative. And on the spending side, very much, again, it came down a little bit in the third quarter, but remains at very high levels. So again, it's showing up in lots of data. So that's the demand side of the equation, right? Remain strong, don't panic when you see slower year-over-year comps. But what about the supply side? Because we are hearing a lot recently about what's going on in supply, right? You folks are buying a lot of trucks. That's a positive thing. But is it adding to capacity? That's what I keep, everybody's talking about. Our data shows that it is not adding to capacity, that this is a replacement cycle, right? In large part because you can't find enough drivers to put in those trucks, right? So I've sort of split out, this is just for hire TL, large carriers on the left, small carriers on the right. Now there was a time, we came out of that period in 2014 when freight was really good, and overall in the industry we did add to some capacity, mainly through small carriers. But look what the small fleets are doing now. We'll call it flat. Right? This is the time everybody wants to grow. But why can't they? Right? You have a difficult time finding qualified drivers. And large fleets are down for the year. With that said, I think there's some interesting trends in all of this data. So first of all, let's look at both of those, but on year-over-year basis. So the red line is large truckload carriers, and the blue line, small truckload. Now on the left-hand side there, you clearly see where those small fleets were adding back in late 2015, early 2016, then went negative, and it's now slightly positive on a year-over-year basis. Some of that's easy comps, though. Same with truckload carriers, large truckload carriers. They're flattish at this point, but again, some of that's easy comps, right? They were shedding equipment and so forth. So we have stopped the bleeding, right? But we're not adding to the capacity out there. So the bleeding is stopped, but we're not really adding to it. But I'm going to show you something I think is really interesting. I'm going to take that red line, and I'm going to split that out between company tractors and independent contractors. Right? And look what is going on. So the green line is the number of ICs, and that is falling, whereas company tractors are actually going up, right? So if we look at the numbers, trough to peak, over this period, company tractors are up 3.6%, but peak to trough, IC numbers are down 3.8%. So a couple things going on. And this is an important point, because I've been reading some of this of people looking at the industry, and I think, we need to clarify a couple things. One is, I think some of these ICs have looked at the spot market for a while. It was really strong and said, why? Because these are leased on ICs, right? So these are not all ICs. These are leased on independent contractors to these companies. And I think some of them were like, wow, right? The spot market's going crazy. I'm going to go off and get into the spot market, right? I think a little bit of that's happened. We also know that some fleets, right, are trying to convert some of their ICs to employees, right? So you got a couple things going on there. Also, when an IC is leaving, I think some of these fleets are replacing it with a company tractor. Here's what I want to talk about. Some folks are looking at the Department of Labor numbers in terms of total industry employment and see that it's going up, and are drawing a conclusion that capacity must be going up because most of our employment are the number of drivers. That is true. But what I think is going on, if you have, when the Department of Labor goes to these companies, let's say you got 100 tractors, right? But in a particular month, you tell them how many employees you have. And let's say the next month, you take a couple of those ICs, they either leave or you convert them to employees. Your capacity remains the same, but you now have more employees. Because remember, if it's an IC, it's not an employee. You don't count it to the DOL. So I think what's happening is it looks like the numbers are going up, but really what you have is some of this going on where there's some conversion from IC to employees. Does that make sense, everybody? So I think some of these folks are just sort of, we need to understand that even though the DOL numbers are going up, they're not wrong. The employment numbers are rising, but it doesn't mean capacity is rising by that amount. So just something to bring up. On the LTL front, LTL trucks are up from a year earlier, but still down from 2016. So not a lot of capacity building here as well. So what does that all lead to? Well, average revenue per mile has been strong. Year to date, third quarter, average revenue per ton for LTL. So not surprising, right? Demand strong, supplies limited, and so forth. And lastly, if we look at it, there we go, on a year-over-year basis, this go back to the early 1990s. This has been some of the strongest increase in average revenue per mile, excluding fuel surcharges, that we have seen. So in a nutshell, yes, we got into a little soft patch at the end of the third quarter. I am absolutely not worried about it. We are going to see a deceleration, both in our industry and the general economy, but deceleration does not mean decrease. It just means slower rate of growth. It remains at high levels. The economy remains at high levels. Our industry, in terms of volumes, remain at high levels. And so we should have, this expansion should continue to go and become the longest in history. And that's what I had. Can I take a couple questions? All right. No hard ones. Oh, Chris is all right. He went, I think it's time to. Any questions? Yeah. No, to be honest with you, I think with this, sorry, I'll repeat the question. So what about in 2020, right, with this international regulation comes on board, are we, it'll increase the price, but will there be shortages of fuel? I don't know. Hopefully not. I mean, and we'll have to see it again. Glenn and I will remain on top of it and keep you folks abreast. But the good news here is the U.S. is now a major producer of oil and fuel throughout the world. So as those prices rise, and this happens for a host of reasons, we can start producing more, right? And that'll put more out there onto the market, drop the price at least a little bit, and it should help. So we have a lot more supply out there than we thought we had even a few years ago, and so that will help, right? But again, this is new. This is an international regulation. It's going to be impacts throughout the world. So stay tuned. But it is scary than price.
So I know you have some frequent flyer miles to Mexico and Canada. Is China next for you both?
I hope not. But you bring up a good point, right? And we've talked a lot about tariffs and what's going on. So on the trade front, generally, I'm very pleased about getting a deal done between all three countries. It still has to pass. Remember, not just our Congress, it has to pass in Canada and in Mexico. But assuming that happens, that is very much a positive. Long term, if the tariffs continue elsewhere, including the biggest being China, and let me tell you, China's a problem, right? Please don't take these remarks as not thinking that or believing that. They are. But I will say, the longer the tariffs go on, okay, the more impact they will have on the economy, and the more negative it will be, okay? So hopefully it's a negotiating sort of tactic, and it works, and we can get through that. However, if we're in 6 months, 9 months, and the tariffs go up, the third list was 10% until January of this coming year, and then goes to 25% tariffs. And if we continue with that for a very long time, we will reassess the situation. I'm not saying it will throw us into a recession, but it certainly can lower the rate of growth. Chris?
And I really appreciate all of your added efforts over the last couple of years on the trade portfolio. You repeatedly talked about how you were handling that, where you're traveling, what you're doing, and the status of these negotiations, and I first want to thank you for that. But that trade portfolio actually fits within the international portfolio, and you have done a lot of travel, and you are kind of the eyes and ears of the ATA abroad. You have made some trips. I've made trips with you. Can you share a little bit about what you've observe